Hello again. In this video, we're going to see now that AppAsap has created our database and gave us the admin CMS to manage the data, how it created the API so that we could have our mobile app talk to it and retrieve the needed data from it. But first of all, what's an API? API stands for Application Programming Interface, and it's basically a way that computer scientists created to have your computer talk to another computer, which is the server. Why? Because the server has the database and all the data and has the business logic. So it enables you to ask it queries like, hey, I want to order an Uber and I don't know which drivers are near me. Can you please tell me uh, what's my nearest driver? Um, So you could ask the server, it connects to the other computers, and it could return to you your response. So basically, an API is a request that you send from your computer, whether it's through a mobile app or through the browser. So it's a request that you ask from your device or that your device asks the server, and then the server gives you a response. It returns to you data as well. Why do we need an API? Why don't we just talk to the database? Because the API serves as an intermediate layer that has additional features, like security. Maybe we don't want anyone to talk to our database, only logged in users. So we have that security layer in the API. Maybe we want to do complex queries and filters and searches and sorting. So we could also do that through the API. Maybe we want to know what are the queries that we can ask our database. We could also know that from the API. So it serves as an intermediate step. We could also embed inside of it logic. So instead of just retrieving data, it could do some processing on the data before it returns it to us, maybe put it in a different format. So all of that are features that the API allows us to do. So without further ado, AppAsap has created for us an API that satisfies the requirements of the mobile app so that it can ask all of the questions that it needs to our database to get the data needed. Let's take a look. If we go to the API Playground tab, we can see here the API documentation of our app. So we can see that we have all of our database tables. We have a database table called cart, category, order, and so on. So for each table, it created a few API endpoints. And an endpoint means that it's a request that you can ask the server. So for each table, we can ask the server 5 different questions about that database table. So let's take the products table, for instance. Our server allows us to ask it to get us all the products in the database so that we could display them in the mobile app. We can ask it to create a new product. We can ask it to get a certain product by its ID, or we could ask it to edit a certain product or delete a certain product. We can ask the same questions for anything else. So maybe for the users, we can get all users, we can create a user, we can get a certain user by ID, and we can edit a user and delete a user. So these are called CRUD operate. Sorry, these are called CRUD operations: create, read, update, and delete. CRUD, CRUD operations. So the API allows you to do CRUD operations on each database table. It allows you to ask any of those 5 questions. Let's go back to the products and try to see what's the get all products request. How can we perform that request? How can our mobile app or the browser ask the server to get us the data that's in the database? So first off, I want to remind you that AppAsap has already hosted your database and already hosted your API and gave you your own URL to access the API. So in order to be able to ask the server, you need a URL for your own server. So AppAsap created a URL for your own server. And each time you generate an app with AppAsap, it gives you your own URL. So you could ask all of those questions. So first off, we can get all products. Let's try it out. This is a playground that enables us to try the API and ask the questions that we need. So we can see that we can get all products, but it has a few query parameters. So we can get all products and it's going to return them all from the database, or we could add some query parameters, like asking it so that when it's returning the product, we need them sorted by name in ascending order, for instance. So we can add query parameters to make sure that the data that's getting returned is in a specified format. Here, we could also add a date filter. So give me the products that were created between the first date and the second date. And here is an example for the date format. It takes the year, the month, the day, and then hour, minute, second. So I could give it a certain date time and ask it to give me the products between that date time. Also, this endpoint supports pagination. Pagination means that maybe I have tens of thousands of products, and returning them in one request would be very heavy and very slow for the server. So I could get them in pages. I want to get the first page or the first 3 elements. So I could tell it that I want to skip 0 elements and I want to get 3 elements. So it's going to get me the first 3 elements. Maybe I want the next 3 elements. So I could say, give me the elements between 3 and 6. So it's going to give me the second 3 elements, and so on. So I can just specify which section of my products do I need, or my data in general. Another query parameter is that I can select certain columns to only be returned. Maybe I don't want to return all of the products data. I just want to know the names of the products that I have. So I could just say name, and then it would choose the name column and return all of the names of the products. But let's return all of the data of the product. And we could also filter. So remember in the admin panel, when we got the products that had the word blue in them, we could do that, where the name contains blue. And in order to know how to write this syntax, you can go to our documentation. It's going to be very clear there. But I'm not going to add any of those query parameters. I'm just going to add the sort. And now I can execute the query. And by executing the query, I asked the server a question. I went to my URL, which AppAsap created for me, and I went to the get all products endpoint, and I gave it a query parameter to sort by name in ascending order. And actually, this URL does just that. It asks the server to get all products sorted in ascending order by name. If I paste this in my browser or in any way that can talk to the API, it should be able to talk to the API if it's authorized. So now that I asked the question, the API returned a response, which is what constitutes an API. It's a request and a response. So the response has the column name and the value. So we have a product that has an ID 1 created at this time, updated at this time, that has a name called Men Black Shoes, description, tags, and an image, which is an image URL that I can copy and paste in the browser to view the image, and so on. So that's basically the endpoint that's get all products. Let's try to add another query parameter and only select the name, because maybe I don't want all of this data. Here, the response now has only the column, name, and its value for all of the products. So that's the first question that we can ask. Get all products and give it some query parameters so that we can manipulate which products we need. The next thing we could do is to create a product. And to create a product, we need to give it a name, a description, a price, tags, if it has discount value, category ID, and an image file. I'm not going to give it an image. I'm not going to give it a discount. And yeah, let's execute it. So here, everything is perfect. It returned the data that it has put. And it has made a request on my URL, add product, and to create it, which is a post request. So a request can either be a get, where you're asking the server to retrieve information, or a post request where you're asking the server to save information. So that's another type of question that you could ask your server. We could also get product by ID. So if we enter maybe ID 3, we could get a product with the ID 3, which is the one that we just created. And we got its information, and this URL is the URL for this request or endpoint. This is a GET request because we're getting information. Another type of request is PUT request, where we're not creating a new record in the database or getting data. We're editing the data. So maybe we want to edit the product which has ID 3 that I just created and have the name be example 2 and not have a discount or an image file. Just like that, it went and created the PUT request with our new data and modified the data. And finally, we can delete a product. So I could just remove that product from the database and it will delete it for me. So that's basically the API. It's a collection of endpoints, which are questions that we can ask the server so that it can ask the database to perform the operation that we're doing. Either we ask it to retrieve something, or we ask it to create something, or we ask it to edit something or delete something. A CRUD API. Now the API has security. As we can see here, there's this lock on each endpoint, which means that it's a secure endpoint that only logged in users can access, not anyone else. And how does that happen? So under the hood, what's happening is that with each request that we're asking to this URL, the browser is adding a request header, which is this one, and adding the authentication token of my logged in user. How did it get this authentication token? From here. I am authorized and I have a token. I could log out and now I won't be authorized. I won't even be able to see any of the endpoints except the ones that don't have the lock on them, like to create a new account. But if I authorize again, I'm going to be able to see them again and interact with them. So it's a secure API. Only logged in users can talk to it. And if you want to get your own token, you can just log in with your user. You could just enter your email and password and execute that. And then it's going to give you in the response your token. You can take it and authorize with it. And this user is basically the admin user. That's the default one that you have, which is basically your email that you signed up with into AppAsap. And the password is the password that you entered in the pop-up after your app finished generation or it got generated. Or it could be any user that you created through the admin CMS, or it could be any user that you created using the register endpoint, because you can register a new user from here and ask the server to register a new user. More information about that in our documentation to know the exact flow of how to do that using the API. And also more information in the documentation regarding how to talk to the API from your mobile app or from anywhere else. So that's basically what AppAsap has built for us. It took us through a journey of Q&A, requirements analysis, and documentation, database design, hosted everything for us, including the API and the admin CMS. You can now easily go build your mobile app code and integrate it to this backend. Now, like I said, in the future, we're going to also enable you to automate this component. So stay tuned. Thank you for tuning in. Take a look at the documentation, join our Discord community. If you have any questions, we'd be love to help you. Bye-bye.